It happened in broad daylight on a quiet suburban sidewalk where kids usually rode their bikes and elderly couples watered their lawns. My daughter, Emily, was out there just a few feet from our front porch, struggling to get her wheelchair over a small bump on the pavement. She was trying to reach a neighbor's door, waving weakly for help, because her inhaler had slipped out of her lap and rolled into the grass. I watched through the window, half distracted by a ringing phone, until I saw her raise her arm and call out, her voice thin but brave, "Excuse me, ma'am, can you help me?" And that's when Karen turned. She wasn't startled, she wasn't confused. She was calm, calm in a way that still makes my blood run cold. She didn't ask a question. She didn't hesitate. She simply lifted her hand, and in it a silver pistol gleamed under the summer sun. I froze. My scream caught in my throat. Emily's lips parted in fear, her eyes wide and trembling, still not understanding what was happening. Then bang. One shot. It rang through the cul-de-sac like thunder. Emily jerked back. Her small, fragile frame tipped sideways, and the wheelchair tilted. She slumped to the concrete. A crimson bloom spread across her shirt as she gasped, her hand reaching toward the woman who had just pulled the trigger. Karen didn't flinch. She didn't run. She didn't even look panicked. She glanced at the fallen girl with cold indifference, tucked the pistol into her bag, and then smiled. A tight, satisfied smile, like she'd just finished a chore. And then she walked away. Just like that. Not a word. Not a backward glance. She walked down the sidewalk like it was just another Tuesday morning, while my daughter bled into the cracks of the pavement. Neighbors stood on porches. Some screamed. Some ran. Some just stood. I rushed out, stumbling over the porch steps, collapsing beside Emily, my hands pressed against the wound, praying, begging her to stay with me. Her eyes fluttered, her lips moved, and she whispered, "Why, Mama? What did I do wrong?" And in that moment, the world shattered. You're probably wondering, how did it come to this? How does a neighbor, protected by an HOA badge and suburban privilege, shoot a disabled child who was only asking for help? How does a community allow someone like her to rise to that kind of power unchecked? Sit with me. I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you how it started and how I refuse to let it end there. My name is Michelle Carter, and before my world was ripped apart on a sunny morning by a woman who thought power gave her the right to decide who deserves help, I was just a proud single mother trying to raise the strongest girl I've ever known. My daughter, Emily Rose. Emily was born 3 weeks early with a rare genetic condition called spinal muscular atrophy type 2. The doctors told me she might never walk, that she'd be dependent on machines, that her life would be filled with limits. But no one told me she'd teach me how to live. From the moment I first held her, tiny, warm, struggling but fighting, I knew this little girl was not just a survivor. She was a warrior in a world that barely makes room for the vulnerable. She didn't cry much. Instead, she smiled. She listened. She learned. And as the years passed, even as her muscles weakened and the chair became her constant companion, she carried a light inside her that made everyone lean in closer. Emily loved the stars. I don't mean she just liked them. I mean she dreamed of touching them. She kept a glow-in-the-dark constellation map over her bed and would point to Orion's belt and say, "That's where my courage lives." She wanted to be an astronomer, to build telescopes that looked deeper than the ones we already had, so people stopped saying disabled kids can't reach for the sky. I worked double shifts as a nurse's aide to make sure she had everything she needed. We didn't have a big house or fancy clothes, or even a car that didn't squeal when turned left, but we had laughter, we had board game nights, and we had our tiny dream that one day Emily would sit in a control room and send satellites into orbit, and I'd be watching her on a TV screen with tears in my eyes. 3 years ago, after saving every penny and working myself to the edge, I bought our first home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, Elmwood Pines. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. Or, at least, it looked that way on paper. The lawns were trimmed. The mailboxes were shiny. The school was just 5 blocks away, and the sidewalks had ramps. It felt like a new beginning for us. We moved in that fall, and for the first few weeks, everything felt calm. Emily decorated her room, with glow stars and hung posters of galaxies. Neighbors dropped by with cookies. One elderly woman, Mrs. Thompson, even knit Emily a blanket with the words "to the moon and back." We thought we'd found home. Finally, Emily became something of a little neighborhood celebrity. Every morning she'd roll out in her chair with her big, glittery backpack strapped on, greeting every dog by name and asking the mailman how his daughter's violin recital went. She radiated joy, infectious, bright, and completely disarming. Even the coldest faces warmed when she smiled, but not everyone smiled back. That's when I noticed her. Karen. She lived 4 houses down. Neat little hedges, white shutters, flag, always perfectly positioned. She never waved, never smiled. The first time she spoke to me, it was to ask if Emily's chair had rubber wheels because I'd hate for her to leave marks on the sidewalk. I remember blinking at her, unsure if she was serious. But Emily had tugged at my sleeve that day and said, "She's probably just sad inside. I'll smile at her tomorrow." That was my daughter. Even when someone gave her cold, she gave back warmth. Over time, though the tension began to build, Emily once decorated our mailbox for her science club's fundraiser, and HOA sent us a warning. Another time, she drew chalk stars on the curb for the neighbor kids, and Karen reported it as graffiti. Still, Emily didn't let it get to her. "They just don't know me yet," she'd say. "They'll learn." And I believed her, because her kindness had power, the kind that transforms people if they let it. What the world didn't see, what Karen refused to see, was that every day my daughter rolled out that front door, she was making a choice to rise. It wasn't just about being in a wheelchair. It was about facing a world that either ignored her or pitted her, and daring to live loudly anyway. Her strength wasn't loud. It was gentle and constant. The kind that doesn't ask for applause, but changes hearts anyway. We had our hard days. Sometimes she'd cry because a playground wasn't accessible, or because another kid asked her why her legs didn't work. I'd hold her and say, "Baby, your heart works just fine, and that's what the world really needs." And she'd nod, wipe her eyes, and plan her next space drawing. We never imagined that the biggest danger to Emily wouldn't be her illness or a car or a fall, but a neighbor. A woman who saw a child asking for help not as someone to protect, but as a nuisance to erase. Looking back, I wonder if there's anything I missed, any signs I should have seen. But when you're a mother fighting every day for normalcy, you want to believe the world is better than it is. You want to believe the worst thing that will ever happen is a scraped knee or a hard day at school. Not a bullet, not betrayal, not silence from people who claim to be your community. But this isn't just a story about grief. This is a story about my daughter's fight, about her light, about how one voice, one small, brave girl, refused to dim even when the world turned its back. And that's why I have to tell this story. Because Emily isn't just a name or a victim. She was my whole heart, and she mattered. They called her Miss Regulation, though never to her face. Her real name was Karen Whitmore. But if you lived anywhere within Elmwood Pines, you knew exactly who she was long before you met her. She was the kind of neighbor who could spot an unapproved garden gnome from 50 feet away and would proudly march up your walkway, clipboard in hand, to let you know it violated Section 3.2 of the HOA Appearance Code. From the moment we moved into the neighborhood, it was clear Karen wasn't just a resident, she believed she was the HOA. Sure, there was an actual HOA board, but she had unofficially crowned herself its queen. And while she never raised her voice, there was something bone-deep unsettling about her cold politeness. A smile that never reached her eyes. A tone that wrapped insults in velvet. Passive aggression was her weapon, and she wielded it like a scalpel. Karen was always dressed in crisp beige slacks, clean white shirts, and those pearl earrings that made her look like she stepped out of a magazine titled Suburban Perfection Monthly. Her front yard was immaculate. The grass always a uniform shade of green, trimmed at exactly the HOA-mandated 2.5 inches. Her mailbox gleamed as if polished daily. Her flower beds bloomed in symmetrical rows. But beyond the white shutters and plastic smiles was a woman obsessed with order, her version of order. The first time she approached me, I was watering the daisies Emily and I had planted along the walkway. Karen walked right past the flowers, looked down at the small Emily's Galaxy Garden sign we had made together, and said flatly, "T hats, not HOA approved signage. No welcome to the neighborhood. No smile. Just a thinly veiled order wrapped in politeness." I told her it was just a nameplate for my daughter's science club project, and she replied, "Yes, well, projects are best kept inside where they belong." At first, I brushed it off. Some people are just rigid. I thought maybe she was having a bad day. But over the next few weeks, I saw the pattern. It wasn't just us. She'd leave typed notes in neighbors' mailboxes if their trash bins were out 10 minutes past pickup. She once reported a teenager for skateboarding on the sidewalk, calling it reckless endangerment. She measured grass with a ruler. A ruler. And if you dared challenge her, she'd smile that same tight smile and whisper something like, "Well, the HOA does expect us to maintain standards." But her real disdain wasn't for trash bins or chalk drawings. It was for anything that didn't fit her pristine vision of suburban control. And my daughter Emily, in her pink wheelchair with stargazer stickers and dreams too big for her small frame, didn't fit. The first time Karen saw Emily, her eyes lingered, not in curiosity or compassion, but in judgment. I'll never forget it. Emily had just come outside with her telescope to look at Venus. She smiled and waved at Karen across the street. Karen didn't wave back. Instead, she squinted, as if Emily's presence disrupted the harmony of her neat little world. Later that evening, she sent me an email via the HOA group citing congestion on the sidewalk and asking that we keep personal items and equipment stored away to preserve neighborhood order. She didn't mention my daughter by name, but she didn't need to. Things escalated from there. Emily once placed hand-painted rocks around the neighborhood with kind messages. "You matter, keep looking up, stars shine in darkness." Karen removed every single one and left them in a basket on our porch with a note, "Please refrain from leaving items in shared community space." When Emily tried to organize a small stargazing evening for the neighbor kids, blankets on the grass, a shared telescope, Karen reported it as an unregistered event and threatened to fine us for unauthorized gatherings. I confronted her once, gently, asking why she seemed so bothered by a child trying to spread joy. She tilted her head and said, "It's nothing personal, Michelle. But when we let one exception slip through, the whole system unravels. It's about the principle." But there was something personal about it, something deeper. It wasn't about rules. It was about power. Karen needed control the way others need air, and anyone who challenged her, anyone who dared to live differently, especially someone like my daughter who refused to hide her disability behind closed doors, became a threat. Emily never saw it that way. "She just doesn't know me yet," she'd repeat with that hopeful heart of hers. "Maybe I'll show her the stars one day." And I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that even the hardest hearts could be softened by kindness. But Karen wasn't interested in understanding. She was interested in dominance. She didn't want neighbors, she wanted subjects. She once accused us of lowering property values by attracting attention. Another time, she told Emily directly, "It's nothing against you, dear, but we try to keep Elmwood a calm and quiet place." The implication was clear: you don't belong here. But Emily never stopped smiling, never stopped waving, never stopped dreaming. And maybe that's what infuriated Karen the most, that her cruelty couldn't dim the light of a girl she deemed unworthy. She wasn't used to being resisted, especially not by someone so small, so fragile, and yet so undeniably radiant. Looking back, the signs were all there. The cold glances, the veiled threats, the endless citations and warnings. Karen wasn't just an unpleasant neighbor. She was a storm building on the horizon. And we, in our innocence, in our desperate hope for peace, never imagined how dark that storm would become. But we would learn. Oh, we would learn. What started as subtle disapproval slowly morphed into something more sinister, something targeted, persistent, and dangerously personal. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules anymore, she was fixated. What once were cold glances became deliberate watchfulness. Every move we made seemed to be under surveillance. If our trash bin was placed an inch outside the designated zone, we'd get a warning. If Emily's chair left even the faintest tire mark on the sidewalk, a photo of it would somehow end up attached to an HOA complaint with our address circled in red. She was watching us, specifically us, as if we were a threat to everything she'd built her sterile little world upon. It didn't take long before the notices started arriving with disturbing regularity. First, it was a formal letter about excessive decorations when Emily hung paper stars in our window for Disability Awareness Month. Then came a $50 fine for unauthorized modifications to the mailbox, which in reality was just a glow-in-the-dark sticker of Saturn Emily had placed on the side to match her cosmic theme. I tried to laugh it off at first. I really did. It's just a sticker, I told the HOA board. A child's harmless self-expression. But they only shrugged and cited regulations. Karen's voice echoed louder than reason in those meetings. She wasn't just a neighbor anymore. She was a voice shaping policies, guiding decisions, turning once neutral faces against us with whispers and technicalities. Then came the anonymous complaints, each one more absurd than the last. Someone accused us of causing noise pollution because of Emily's electric wheelchair motor. Another claimed we were attracting pity traffic from the neighborhood because I had once posted a fundraiser link for her medical equipment on a local Facebook group. My front flower beds were declared non-compliant because the blossoms were too bright and distract from community cohesion. It was laughable until it wasn't. One morning, I stepped out to find our mailbox had been dented in, and Emily's chalk drawings on the sidewalk had been washed away with bleach. I knew who had done it. There were no cameras, no witnesses, just silence. But deep down I knew. Because that silence, the one Karen carried around her like perfume, had become loud with meaning. And yet every time I tried to speak up, I was told there was no evidence, that I couldn't prove intent, that perhaps I was being overly sensitive. But Emily felt it too. She stopped decorating the yard. She stopped drawing stars on the pavement. "It's okay, Mom," she'd whisper when she caught me fuming over another bogus fine. "I don't want to cause trouble." And hearing those words from a child who had spent her whole life rising above limitations, that crushed me more than all the notices combined. Her light was dimming, and no matter how fiercely I tried to shield her from Karen's campaign of intimidation, I could see it. The weariness in her eyes, the slight hesitation before wheeling out the front door, the way she stopped waving at our neighbor's house altogether. But she still fought to smile, still tried to believe the best. "Maybe she's just afraid of different," she said once, quietly as we watched Karen measure another neighbor's fence with a tape ruler. "Maybe she needs someone to show her we're not scary." I wanted to believe that too. But I also knew the truth. This wasn't about fear, it was about power. Karen wasn't trying to protect the community. She was trying to erase anything that challenged her illusion of control. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, Emily and I were planting a few succulents in a raised garden bed we'd installed just beside the porch, something low maintenance that she could access easily from her chair. We'd spent hours designing it together, researching which plants would thrive in sunlight, painting the wooden panels a cheerful teal. It wasn't large, it didn't obstruct anything, and I had even double-checked the HOA guidelines to ensure it was compliant. The very next day, I came home from work to find the entire garden ripped out, plants broken, soil spilled across the sidewalk, and a typed letter tucked in our screen door. Unapproved structure. Please refrain from further violations. Final warning. Emily sat on the porch in stunned silence, her fingers still speckled with dirt, her face blank. I knelt beside her, shaking, holding back the rage that burned through every inch of my body. She didn't say a word, just reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a tiny, broken succulent leaf. "We worked so hard," she whispered. "I thought this one would grow." That night, I filed an official complaint with the HOA and even spoke with a local community advocate. I gathered photographs, timeline logs, everything. But again, no action, no accountability. These are internal HOA matters, they told me. We cannot interfere unless a crime is reported. I asked, isn't targeted harassment a crime? The silence on the other end said more than words ever could. Karen didn't just hate us, she wanted us gone. She didn't care how much Emily had overcome. She didn't care about compassion or community. She cared about uniformity control and eliminating the problems that didn't fit in her clean little world. At one point, she even said it out loud during an HOA meeting when I confronted her in front of others. Maybe you'd be happier in a place more suited to special needs families, she said, her voice smooth as silk. There was a gasp in the room. Some looked shocked. A few looked away. But no one said anything. No one stood up. And that's when I realized the most devastating part. It wasn't just Karen. It was the silence of those who saw and did nothing. The neighbors who smiled at Emily one day, but said nothing the next when her stars were scraped off the pavement. The board members who agreed in private but stayed neutral in public. The system that protected its rules more than its people. Emily deserved better. I deserved better. And deep down, I knew something had to change. But I never imagined how far Karen would go to preserve her power. I thought we were just fighting fines and insults. I didn't know we were standing at the edge of something far darker, something irreversible, something violent. It was a Sunday afternoon, quiet, breezy, the kind of day where even the birdsong felt unbothered. Emily had been cooped up all morning with her astronomy homework, and I suggested she roll outside for some fresh air. She eagerly agreed, slipping into her hoodie, tucking a notebook onto her lap, and heading out with that same warm energy she always carried, even after everything Karen had thrown our way. I stood in the kitchen preparing her favorite grilled cheese when I heard her voice from the porch, soft and surprised. "Hey there, buddy, are you lost?" I looked out the window and saw a small golden retriever, muddy, panting, clearly frightened, sniffing around our front lawn. Emily had stopped her chair and was gently patting the ground, offering the dog water from her bottle cap. The dog wagged its tail, hesitantly edging closer. I smiled. That was Emily. Even when the world was cruel, she found room to be kind. A moment later, I heard a door slam. Karen's door. She stepped out in her usual beige slacks, arms crossed, face tight, with that performative concern she wore like armor. "What's going on here?" She called out sharply, walking briskly toward our property line. "Is that your dog?" Emily shook her head politely. "No, ma'am. I think he's lost. I was just trying to give him water." He looked scared. But Karen didn't hear her tone, only her presence. Her gaze locked onto Emily like a hawk circling prey. "You shouldn't be touching animals you don't know. That's dangerous," she snapped. "What if it has rabies? What if it attacks? Who's going to take responsibility then?" Emily recoiled slightly, startled by the accusation. "He's not hurting anyone," she said gently. "He's just thirsty." Karen's expression shifted just a flicker, but I saw it. That flicker of something meaner. "Don't get smart with me," she barked. "I know you're kind. You think you're special because of that chair, like the rules don't apply to you." I had already started moving toward the front door when her voice rose again. "Step away from the dog now, or I swear," but Emily stayed calm. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said softly. "I was just trying to help." And then the dog, as if sensing the tension, bolted, dashing across the street into a bush. Karen's tone immediately turned venomous. "You scared off. What if it was someone's support animal? What if it gets hit by a car? That's on you." She pointed a shaking finger at Emily. "I'll be reporting this. You people are a liability to this neighborhood." By the time I stepped onto the porch and said, "That's enough," Karen had already pulled out her phone, taking pictures of Emily. Yes, pictures of a child in a wheelchair while ranting into the air about dangerous behavior. I stood between them and told her back off. She didn't listen. Instead, she leaned in closer and hissed so quietly I almost thought I imagined it. "Don't make me do something I'll regret, or maybe I won't." Her smile was tight, her breath sour with menace. My heart dropped. I clutched Emily's shoulder and walked her back inside as Karen continued muttering, "I've got evidence now. Just wait." That night, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA, attached every detail, and sent it with trembling fingers. I called the non emergency police line and reported the threat. But the dispatcher sounded indifferent. Did she physically threaten you? They asked. Did she show a weapon? I said no. Then there's not much we can do unless it escalates. That word, escalates, rattled in my chest like a warning bell. I knew what Karen was capable of, but the system didn't care about implications. It only responded to consequences. The next day, Emily didn't want to leave her room. Her notebook sat unopened, her telescope untouched. Why does she hate me so much? She asked, her voice breaking in a way I hadn't heard before. I was just helping a dog. Why does everything I do make her angry? I tried to comfort her, but I didn't have the words. Because the truth was, Karen didn't hate Emily for what she did. She hated Emily for what she represented. Independence, defiance, life that couldn't be boxed into regulation. Emily was a light Karen couldn't snuff out through fines or HOA citations. So now, she was inching toward something darker. And we both felt it, though neither of us said it out loud. The following afternoon, I noticed something new on Karen's porch, a protected by firearm security sign. Maybe it had always been there. Or maybe she put it up after the dog incident as a silent warning. A way to say I'm armed and I know my rights. Either way, it felt deliberate. I wanted to believe we were still safe, that no one in our carefully manicured neighborhood would really hurt a child. But something inside me, some primal mother's instinct, kept whispering, watch her. She's not done. And I was right, because this wasn't just another HOA feud. This wasn't about dogs, chalk, or sticker-covered mailboxes. This was about power and the illusion of control slipping through Karen's fingers the longer Emily lived freely in her presence. We weren't dealing with a woman anymore. We were dealing with a threat disguised in pearls and professionalism. And in the days that followed, every step Emily took outside our door became a gamble. A silent game of when, not if. The lost dog was just the beginning. The real tragedy was already unfolding. We just didn't know how close it had come. It was a Tuesday morning, one of those rare days where the air felt calm, where the sky held no threats, and everything seemed, just for a moment, peaceful. Emily had woken up earlier than usual, humming under her breath while folding a small letter she had written to her friend Amelia, her pen pal from a disability support group. She had carefully placed a glitter sticker on the corner, the kind she reserved for special letters, and asked if she could take it to the neighborhood mailbox herself. I hesitated. After everything with Karen, every confrontation, every cold stare, every veiled threat, it had become second nature to worry. But I didn't want to cage her. I didn't want my daughter's world to shrink because one woman couldn't accept her light. So I nodded. Just stay on the path and come right back, okay? I said. She smiled wide, that dimple peeking out on her left cheek, and replied, I'll be quick. Maybe the stars will see me. She rolled down the ramp, her wheels quiet against the wood, the envelope resting neatly on her lap. I watched her through the window for a moment. How she slowed to wave at the old oak tree, where she once tied glow-in-the-dark stars, how she adjusted her hoodie with one hand while steering with the other, how the letter flapped slightly in the wind. She was just a kid, mailing a letter. But my stomach churned. The world outside our door had stopped feeling safe a long time ago. I turned to grab my coffee and maybe call out once more just to say I love you, but before the words left my mouth, I heard it. That sound. A crack, like fire splitting wood. My heart seized. Then came a scream. A high, broken, shattering cry that pierced through the morning air like a siren from hell. I dropped my mug. It shattered at my feet, but I didn't stop. I ran, barefoot, breath caught in my chest, instinct screaming louder than any thought. She was lying halfway between our yard and the sidewalk. Her chair had tipped sideways, one wheel still spinning. The envelope was crumpled under her hand, now stained red. Her hoodie was torn near her left shoulder, and blood, bright, horrifying blood, was blooming too fast, too much. She gasped for air, her mouth open, but no sound coming. I fell beside her, my knees scraping against the pavement, my hands already shaking as I pressed them to the wound. Emily, baby, stay with me. I'm here. I'm right here. I cried, but her eyes, oh God, her eyes, they were wide with disbelief, confusion, pain. Why? She mouthed, lips trembling, voice too faint to carry. And then I saw her. Karen. She stood less than 10 feet away, on her perfectly manicured lawn, the pistol still in her hand. No panic, no shock, just stillness, cold, unmoving, deliberate. Her eyes locked on mine, and for a second I thought she might say something. Apologize. Scream. Call for help. But instead she smiled. A tight, chilling curve of the lips. Not manic, not hysterical. Satisfied. And then she turned. She put the gun in her bag, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and walked away. Past the rose bush, down her porch steps, across the lawn. Like nothing happened. The neighbors began to emerge. First one, then three, then a dozen. Some stood frozen. Some whispered. No one moved. No one ran to us. One woman covered her mouth. A man pulled out his phone, but not to call for help. He filmed. I screamed for someone to call 911. Finally, a teenager ran inside his house. I begged. I sobbed. I pressed my hands harder against my daughter's chest, trying to slow the bleeding, trying to hold her together. My sweatshirt was soaked. My arms were trembling. My baby was dying. Minutes dragged like hours. When the ambulance finally arrived, sirens slicing through the heavy silence, they had to pry me off her. I didn't want to let go. I couldn't. Her blood was on my hands, my arms, my shirt, in my mouth from biting my own lip, to keep from screaming into the void. They lifted her fragile body onto the stretcher, and she whimpered once, just once. Then nothing. As the doors closed, the EMT touched my shoulder and whispered, "We'll do our best." But his eyes were telling me the truth. I collapsed in the grass. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Karen was still in her home. She didn't flee. She didn't resist. When they knocked on her door, she answered like she was expecting company. "Oh, you're here," she said. Just that, as if she had planned it, as if the morning was part of her agenda. They arrested her, yes, but gently. No hand on the head, no shove, no raised voice. They spoke to her with courtesy. One officer even offered to carry her purse. I watched from behind an ambulance door, blood still drying on my skin, as they treated her like a victim of circumstance. Emily spent 6 hours in surgery. 6 hours of beeping monitors, whispered updates, and hands clasped in silent prayer. They removed the bullet, stitched the tear, fought for her breath. I sat in a cold plastic chair, surrounded by walls too white, floors too clean, and time too slow. The surgeon came out at 4:17 p.m. His eyes said it before his mouth did. She made it through surgery. But the damage was severe. She's stable for now. For now. 2 words that dangled over me like a thread. That night, I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand, tracing the bandages. Machines beeped steadily, but I couldn't hear them over the replay in my mind. The letter, the smile, the gun, the silence, and that final, devastating question in her eyes. Why me? And the truth was, there was no reason. No justice. Just a child who dared to live boldly in a world that punishes those who don't fit. A mother who dared to believe kindness was enough. And a neighbor whose obsession with control ended in blood on a sidewalk and a community frozen in shame. She shot my daughter, and she smiled, and the world will remember. Because I will make sure it never forgets. The hours after the shooting felt like living in a fog of disbelief, but it didn't take long for the narrative to start twisting, and fast. Karen, through her lawyer, claimed self-defense. Yes, self-defense, against a 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair carrying a letter. Her statement to the police, which I later obtained through my attorney, claimed that she feared for her life after repeated harassment by Emily, and that she believed Emily was attempting to attack her with a concealed object. That concealed object? The envelope. A pink glitter-stickered envelope. The same one Emily had addressed so carefully with her favorite purple pen. Karen said she thought it was a weapon. And with that one grotesque, desperate claim, the system that had already failed us once began its slow machinery of delay, doubt, and deflection. The police were sluggish from the start. Even though Karen was arrested, she wasn't held long. Released on bail the next day. They hadn't even charged her with attempted murder, just assault with a deadly weapon, pending further investigation. She went home, slept in her own bed, watered her roses. Meanwhile, my daughter lay in a hospital room hooked up to monitors, fighting for her life. The neighborhood was suddenly split down the middle. Some neighbors brought flowers, wrote cards, stood by our side. Others stayed silent. Some even nodded politely at Karen during her morning walks. She still walked the same route, same time, head high, like she had nothing to answer for. When I confronted the HOA president, he said, "We're staying neutral until the facts are clear." Neutral, as if neutrality was an option when a child had been shot on their street. I hired a lawyer, a real one, not someone who would let this get buried under legal technicalities. His name was Andre Wallace, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for dragging injustice into the daylight. When I met him, I still had dried blood on my sleeves. I handed him Emily's letter, the one that had somehow become a threat, and said, "They're trying to make her a villain." He read it silently, then looked at me and said, "They won't get away with it. Not this time." Andre didn't wait. He subpoenaed everything: Karen's phone records, security camera footage from the neighborhood, the HOA's complaint logs, police reports, even Karen's social media posts. And what he found was damning. Karen had been documenting our every move, saving pictures of Emily outside, notes about the days she appeared unsupervised, and even drafted emails referring to Emily as a public safety risk. It was an obsession, and now we had proof. The media caught wind after Andre arranged an interview with a local news channel. I sat on a plastic chair in the hospital hallway, looking directly into a camera, and told the world what happened. I held up Emily's envelope. I told them how she was trying to mail a letter. I told them about the smile, the gun, the silence, and something shifted. The story spread. Within 48 hours, hashtag Justice for Emily was trending. Reporters camped outside Karen's home. National anchors called us. Celebrities shared our story. A well-known disability rights activist created a petition demanding full criminal charges. Within a week, it had 750,000 signatures. Candlelight vigils were held in front of our house. Strangers brought sunflowers, Emily's favorite. Schools dedicated space-themed bulletin boards to her. Protesters marched outside the county courthouse with signs that read, "A child, not a threat," and "Protect the vulnerable, not their killers." But for every voice that rose for us, another tried to silence it. Comment sections filled with hate. She should have stayed indoors. Karen did what she had to. Why was that child roaming free? The backlash was brutal. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I owed it to my daughter, not just to defend her, but to restore her. To tell the truth so loudly it would drown out every lie, every excuse, every twisted version of events that tried to paint a helpless child as dangerous. Andre filed a civil suit alongside the criminal case. He pushed for hate crime enhancements, citing Karen's obsessive behavior and discriminatory HOA complaints. He exposed a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Karen hadn't just snapped, she had planned, and the DA, under increasing public pressure, finally added charges of attempted murder and aggravated assault with a hate-bias motivation. Each step of this fight chipped away at the silence. Each rally, each news story, each petition added light to a case that Karen hoped would stay buried in HOA technicalities and community whispers. I watched from Emily's hospital room as people across the country painted stars on their sidewalks in her honor. She was still unconscious, still battling infection and trauma, but her name, her story was out there now. No longer just mine to carry, but the nation's to remember. Justice doesn't come easily, especially for those society overlooks. But I was done being quiet. I was done playing by their rules. This was no longer just about Emily. It was about every child who's been dismissed, every mother told to wait, every community that stayed silent. We were fighting now with everything we had, and I wasn't going to rest until Karen faced the full weight of what she'd done. Until the world saw Emily not as a victim, but as the fighter she always was. The courtroom was colder than I expected, sterile, with gray walls and polished benches, a place where truth was meant to be revealed, yet everything about it felt designed to conceal pain behind formality. Karen sat at the defense table in her usual beige suit, hair pinned back, face stoic as ever. She looked like someone attending a business seminar, not a woman on trial for attempting to kill a disabled child. Her calmness wasn't surprising, not to me. I had seen that look before. I had seen it the moment she pulled the trigger and smiled as my daughter lay bleeding on the pavement. What shocked me more was the confidence she carried into that courtroom, as if justice didn't apply to her, as if this whole trial was just another procedural inconvenience she would navigate and walk away from like every other time the system had given her a pass. I sat directly behind the prosecution table, my hands clenched in my lap, trying to remain steady. Emily was not present. She was still recovering, still in and out of surgeries and trauma therapy, but her photo, the one of her smiling in front of her telescope with stars in her eyes, was mounted on an easel next to the jury box. That picture said more than I ever could. It reminded them she was real, human, and alive, until Karen decided she shouldn't be. From the very start, Karen's defense team painted a twisted portrait. They claimed she was a woman pushed to the brink, a pillar of her community harassed and provoked for months. They said she acted out of fear, that Emily had made repeated threatening gestures, and that Karen believed she was in imminent danger. They argued that my daughter's wheelchair gave her a mechanical advantage and concealed her true intentions. It was gaslighting at its finest, and it felt like a slap in the face to every mother sitting in that room. They showed photos of chalk drawings and mailbox stickers as if they were part of some criminal operation. They quoted Karen's emails where she described Emily as aggressive and me as combative, conveniently omitting the context in which we had defended ourselves from months of harassment. The courtroom began to feel surreal. My daughter, who still couldn't sleep without nightmares, was being portrayed as the aggressor. My grief and my rage were being scrutinized like evidence against me. But then it was our turn. Andre Wallace, calm and resolute, began by laying out the timeline, not just of the shooting, but of every targeted complaint, every note, every HOA citation Karen had issued against us. He showed the jury the photos Karen had taken of Emily, stalker-like photos from across the street with dates, times, annotations. He revealed the letter Karen had written to the HOA just weeks before the shooting, in which she described Emily as a disruptive element that needed corrective boundaries. The courtroom fell silent when he played the security footage, a grainy but undeniable video taken from a neighbor's front porch camera that showed Karen stepping out onto her lawn, raising her arm, and aiming her gun at Emily, who was doing nothing more than holding a letter. There was no charge, no threat, no words of warning. Just the shot. And then, perhaps most damning of all, the footage caught the brief, unmistakable moment after the gun fired. Karen lowering the weapon, turning her head, and smiling. That image became the centerpiece of the trial. The prosecution had it blown up and displayed for the jury. This is not the face of fear, Andre told them. This is not the face of a woman defending herself. This is the face of someone who felt powerful, who felt untouchable, who thought the world would look the other way again. Witnesses took the stand, neighbors who had received Karen's complaints, others who had seen her confront Emily over harmless gestures, a teenager who had heard Karen mutter, "Some people don't belong here," just days before the incident. Even a former HOA board member testified that Karen often manipulated the rules to target families she deemed undesirable. The defense tried to push back. They claimed the footage was out of context, that Karen had a heart condition, that she had called the police multiple times with no response and felt abandoned by the system. But the system hadn't abandoned her. It had protected her for far too long. Now, for once, it was being forced to look at what that protection had cost. When I was called to the stand, I trembled. I recounted everything: Emily's kindness, her joy, the garden she loved, the garden Karen destroyed, the moment she asked me, "Why does she hate me, Mama?" My voice cracked, But I didn't stop. I looked the jury in the eye and said, she was just mailing a letter. She just wanted to be seen. And Karen saw her and decided she didn't belong. After 2 weeks of trial, the jury was sent to deliberate. We waited in that courtroom in a silence thick enough to choke. 34 minutes later, the foreman returned. The verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. There was no outburst, no scream, just a collective exhale from every corner of that room. The judge read the sentence, 25 years without parole. Karen blinked once. No tears, no apologies, just the same stone-faced arrogance she had carried since day one. But the weight of justice had finally landed. Outside the courthouse, supporters clapped, cried, hugged one another. Emily's photo was held high, like a banner. People chanted her name, not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, of courage, of truth. The courtroom battle had ended, and justice finally had spoken. The journey from that quiet Tuesday morning to the courtroom verdict felt like walking through fire barefoot. Every day, I carried the weight of fear, grief, and rage in one hand, and my daughter's courage in the other. There were moments I thought I would break, moments when I felt the world had turned its back not just on us, but on decency. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. Families who let their children play, with Emily suddenly pulled away. It wasn't just the silence that hurt, it was the choice people made to stay silent. Because when injustice happens next door, it's easier to look the other way than to stand up. And yet, through it all, I kept going. Not because I'm strong, but because my daughter was. Emily is still here. Scarred, healing, but still here. And every time I see her smile, even if it's smaller than before, I'm reminded that light doesn't vanish because darkness tried to swallow it. Her bravery wasn't in the way she survived the shooting, it was in how she lived before it. She didn't cower. She didn't hide. She waved at the same neighbor who scowled at her, drew stars where others saw concrete, and believed that people could change, even Karen. That kind of heart changes the world, even when the world doesn't deserve it. To every mother listening, protect your child's light with everything you have. And when that light is threatened, fight, even if your voice shakes, even if no one stands beside you. Because someone else's comfort is never more important than your child's dignity. Speak up, especially when the system tells you to wait. Because waiting is what lets cruelty settle in and call itself normal. And to the neighbors, to the silent ones who watched this happen, you don't get to call it a tragedy if you turned your face the other way while it was building. Communities aren't made of pretty lawns and regulation fences. They're made of people willing to look after one another. If your peace depends on ignoring the pain of others, it's not peace. It's denial. But through the pain, we also saw the best of humanity rise. From strangers across the world who painted stars in Emily's honor, to children sending her handmade cards, to survivors, mothers, and advocates who reached out to say, "You are not alone." In the end, it wasn't the HOA or the courtroom or the lawyers who reminded us of our worth. It was people. People who chose to care. People who showed up. So, if this story has found its way to your screen, let it be a reminder. Justice isn't automatic. It's demanded. It's built by ordinary people who refuse to stay quiet. And if my little girl in a wheelchair can face down hate with a smile and a letter in her hand, then so can you. If you believe justice should never be delayed for the vulnerable, if you believe that no child, especially a disabled one, should be made to feel like a threat in their own neighborhood, then don't let the story end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Speak up for the voices that are so often dismissed, ignored, or silenced. This is more than just one incident. It's a reflection of what so many families face when silence becomes complicity. I want to invite you to become part of a community that cares, that acts, and that remembers. This is Black Cop Stories. We share stories that matter, stories that uncover hidden truths and fight for the people the world forgets. So, if Emily's story touched your heart, don't let it go unseen. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that speaks truth to power. And As Emily once wrote in her letter to a friend, even if they don't understand you at first, be kind anyway. Stars still shine, even in the dark. Let's keep her light shining.